When you play a game, you decide together with the other players that there is an outcome that's valuable. The outcome is something arbitrary. It's not something that has value out of itself. But all the players decide that there is an outcome that's valuable. Only one can have the outcome. So we set up a construction that, and by operating in that construction, there is going to be a winner, and the winner gets the outcome. That's how all games operate. For example, you have this game called soccer, or in American English called football. Well, okay. You have different variations of it, but you have this ball, and you have two teams. Let's say each team has 11 players. You're on the field, and you have two markers, and the one that passes the ball in the team that passes the ball most of the times in the marker of the opposite team, they are the ones that win. And if they win, winning and losing have no value out of itself, but it's because you're participating in a game that winning and losing has a kind of value. And to validate the value of winning and to validate the so-called loss of losing, there is a prize. And the prize can be a cup or a sum of money. You get the idea. A game is a construction aimed at validating an outcome because the outcome has no value out of itself. And games are made for relaxation and to bind people together. That's why you have the World Cup, or that's why within a country you have domestic cups for football, or for tennis, or for basketball, or cricket, whatever sport you can think of. And here's another thing: when it comes to sports, when you play games in sports, it's also to promote things like health. So you have a game which is just a construction, but there's more behind the game. The game serves certain interests. As I mentioned before, when it comes to sports, and you have games that are involved, it can be nation building, it can be to relieve stress from people, there's all to release aggression, it can be to stir up social cohesion in the community, or just to promote people to get out more and to do more with their physical bodies, to get people to exercise. So games always have an interest attached to them. Too often, however, we forget about the interests that are behind the game. Because if there are no interests in a game, then neither losing nor winning makes any sense. It only makes sense if there are interests behind them. Because every game needs to have an outcome that validates the existence of the game. And why? So you need to have the prize to validate the game, and the game is only valid and so-called meaningful if there are interests attached to them. So, okay, just think about this for now. What games have been conditioned to us by our culture, or maybe even by our domestic government or by our peers, our parents? Which games have we been conditioned into without us being aware of that it's a game? Look, it's one thing to join, for example, a basketball team, and you join the basketball team, so you play basketball, you become good at it, and when there are championships, you do your best with your team to win. What is the interest behind this? You get social contacts. You make friends. You're not getting famous, but people will know who you are. So there are advantages with that. For example, you can get dates quicker. I'm talking from a male point of view. So there are interests involved, and those interests are real. They concern real stuff. And the game is a method to and a way to achieve those interests. Now the game that's being played out is also real. You do play basketball. And not only that, there may be other people that It's not that much about the social benefits, but because they want they they may have a troublesome past and they don't want to be haunted by stuff, so they want to distract themselves, and that can be a form of therapy. That can also be a reason why you join a sports team. And of course, in order to participate in this game called basketball, you need to have an interest in the basketball, or else it won't work. But in this case, people know it's a game that they are getting involved in, so they know that even if the game fails, of course, you're not going to feel good about losing a basketball match, but you know it's a game. So you can get over it because your life does not depend upon it. You know it's a game. But what if you're now involved in a game, but you don't realize it's a game? You've been conditioned to think that your whole existence depends upon it. What has happened here? You have been deceived. When you've been deceived through conditioning, you cannot see, because that is what it means to be deceived. That you cannot see that you have been misled, that you've been either lied to, or that you are holding on to something that isn't really worth holding on onto. Look, when you have been conditioned and you don't realize it's just a conditioning, that conditioning is related to contact, to a certain context, you perceive that conditioning as an absolute fact, as the absolute reality. And consequently, there is no other way for you. You're going to invest all your thinking, all your feeling, and all your acting, with acting in your behavior, into winning. You don't realize it's a game. So you give your all. And because you are conditioned, the price that it has, the carrot that is being dangled before you, it feels so precious. That price is your precious. And because others around you are just as conditioned as you, they serve as a validation point for you, as a reference point that this thing is real. This is a reality. You are realistic, you think. And the people around you are realistic also. And the idea of losing, even though you don't call it losing, is frightening. So you have a carrot and a stick. And you invest your whole mind, consequently your emotions, your actions, into securing that outcome. That outcome is winning. But here's the catch. The moment you win, after all that trouble, and you get the prize, you'll begin to sense that something is wrong. And you begin to you begin to reflect back and to realize, hold on a minute, everyone wants this, everyone is doing the same thing. I fought for this. So you hold on to that relief that you've won, which is just a relief. But it's then you're going to realize that this treasure that you held as your precious, it ain't worth a dime. And what happens then? You become bitter. You become depressed, and you begin to wonder what's wrong with you. And it either works out inwardly and it leads to bodily sickness, to mental deterioration, or even to suicide. If it leaks out on the outside, you become violent, sociopathic, and even, well, like a tyrant. So that's really the story that's been repeated over and over again, with millions of players in it, but those players aren't aware that they are players within a game. Now, what is the game I'm talking about here? You might have already guessed it. It's that thing we call society. Society is a fear construct. And it's a fear construct that exists out of a thing that I call killing pacts or murder agreements. I've made a video called Energy Fields Explained, and also a video called Bad Luck Explained. If you haven't watched those, please pause this video and go watch those two before continuing. Okay, but I'll continue now. Look, human beings want security. They want to avoid harm by holding on to what they call what they perceive as security. It's a duality. In this duality, you have the self, that's who we perceive we are, that's what we want to protect. And with the self, you have people that reflect us or who we think we are, or who we are conditioned to think we are. Like those people are often relatives, friends, or people of the same skin color, or they speak the same language. Those are an extension of the self. And then you have all other people who don't belong to the self, who are the other. So you have the us and you have the them. So, and in this duality, you have the self needs to be validated because the self is a myth. It's a false perception based upon the avoidance of pain, the avoidance of harm. And in order for the self to remain in existence, to be validated, you need to have a construction that everyone agrees with. And that's what society is. In order for this fear construct to remain valid, and in order for this fear construct to remain operational, because every social construction, now not every social construction is a fear construct, don't get me wrong, but a lot of social constructions are fear constructs. Okay, but a social construction is only real when people agree that it's real and they act out. For example, you have a thing called cuss words or swear words. And people say you shouldn't use swear words, shouldn't cuss, you shouldn't use profanity. Ages ago, people decided that certain words were wrong. Why did they decide that? So that they can feel connected to one another. That they don't use certain words. Why? Because they are civilized or whatever. That's a social construction, and it's only real when people agree with it. So that's why you have to enforce consequences on those who either agree or disagree with it. People that agree with it and they avoid certain words, you call them polite. You give them relief, or you give them some rewards. And the people that don't agree with this social construction, you call them rude, you call them impolite, you call them disrespectful, and you begin to act out violence towards them. You begin to harm them. So it's only real as far as it has been agreed upon. And let's extend this. When you have a group of people in a large territory, let's say they pass the 10,000s, and all those groups, they have their targets that they transfer all their negative energy upon. And then they come together, the leaders of those people come together. Those leaders are good friends with one another. They're not good friends with their own people, but those are the leaders. They come together and they form what you call the state or the government. And then you have people from those groups that join this organization called the government to help regulate the resources in the territory. And together they generate an equilibrium of how people speak, talk, walk, in order to give predictability to the population, because that's what people often want, predictability. People don't care about freedom. Often they don't even care about justice. They just want predictability to have security. Why? In order for the self, the I, to be safe. That's the fear construct society. And people grow up being conditioned as society is something objectively real. That if you don't match or reflect society, that something wrong is going to happen. And indeed, you do witness that people who don't conform to this false god called society, that they receive violence. And that people, even though everyone can see that the violence, that is wrong, the people will justify the violence. that people come up with excuses to treat some people bad. You saw this happening to others. So in your brain, a connection is made between non-conforming and danger. So what happens now? You are now conditioned to seek validation. And indeed, if you work hard, you do get the validation. If you work hard and you follow all the so-called rules of the game, you probably get a job, a house, a sex partner that you can have relief with, and you may have children with that sex partner, whether you're married or not, doesn't matter. And you're relieved from being a target by the community. But what happens now? You are deceived into thinking that you've earned all of those things because you've worked hard. You don't see it for the dirty game it really is. It is a dirty game because in order for this fear construct to remain operative, there needs to be sacrificial victims. Why? Because it's a duality. If everyone wins, then it's not a game anymore. The whole purpose of a game is that one party loses and the other wins. Or else the prize ain't worth anything. So in order for you to be accepted by society and to be honored by society, it will always be at the expense of someone else. You can't have people that are important if there are not unimportant people. You get what I'm saying here? But people, because they are operating in pride, they cannot see that they have been deceived, and also they don't want to admit that they are deceiving others by continuing to perpetrate this fear construct that we call society. Now, don't get me wrong here. Being conditioned isn't by itself something wrong. Okay, look. You tell little children to not speak to strangers. Why do you do that as a parent? Because you know of the dangers out there, that there are people that have bad intentions with children. So you condition the child, don't speak to strangers. Why? Because there is an objective reason why the child shouldn't just speak with strangers. Well, let's say you have vehicles, cars, bicycles, and people operate with them. So you need to have roads for that. And in order to have, even when you have roads, you need to have guidelines that people adhere to in order to minimize accidents and harm on the roads. So you have traffic signs, and you have the police officers that patrol the roads and fine people if they don't comply with the rules of operating on the road. Now, those rules are arbitrary. And the roads are physical constructions, not a natural thing, but they have a relevance, and that's why it is important that everyone agrees with the traffic signs. So that's also a conditioning, but that's not something wrong. Language is a construction. People need to be able to understand you when you use a certain sound. In English, you have the sound I. The I can either be that organ, that physical organ in your head that you use to receive visual information, or the sound I can be a personal pronoun that refers to yourself. Now, when you say I, what do you mean? So, and when you write it down, how do people know whether you mean the organ or just you yourself? So constructions, let's say social constructions and being conditioned doesn't have to be anything wrong. All right. And when you have a group of people that need to live together and share resources together, it is important that people are conditioned to cooperate with one another. There is nothing wrong with that. If someone is being trained to be a doctor, a medical professional, they will deal with the health of other people. So you need to have a strict conditioning in order to guarantee that once they're graduated and they begin to work as a doctor, that they will have an attitude to secure the health of their patients at all costs, as far as they are allowed to. So conditionings social constructs are all right. We need them to operate as human beings. There's nothing wrong with that. For example, property itself is a social construct. If people are living together near a river, people can have fights and conflicts about resources. So people decide this family owns this land, that family owns that land. It's a construction because that generation will die off and the land is still there. But in the operation, you say that's their property, that's your property. So the thing of stealing is when you violate this social construction in relation to property distribution. Now, I'm not saying that you have to ignore social constructions concerning property distribution, because especially those social constructions, are protected by violent institutions. But just understand, it is a social construction. All right, and most of the time, it's not fairly and beneficially organized. That's why you have poverty in the world. That's why you have class struggles. But just understand, conditionings and social constructs, we use them as human beings, and there's nothing wrong with it. There is, however, something terribly wrong with fear constructs. And there's especially something wrong when you have been conditioned into a fear construct without you being aware it's a fear construct. And it is absolutely wrong that when you malfunction, because you cannot get yourself involved in a fear construct and not malfunction. But in a fear construct, when you malfunction due to the fear construct, it's always your fault. The fear construct is the idol that everyone worships. So whenever something goes wrong, it's your fault. Despite the fact that it's your environment that conditioned you to look at things this way, that even violently harass you through punishment to agree with this fear construct, it's all your fault. And you better take the blame, because people don't want to admit they're wrong. So that's a dirty game. And that's a dirty game Christ wants us free from. Yes, we will have to deal with unfair social constructions. Why? Because we are living in the world. And we will be faced with retaliation and violence when we don't agree with that fear construct called society, or you can call it the world. And we will be dealing with people of the world that don't want to admit that they've been deceived. So we operate in love towards everyone, but we cannot operate in love with everyone. There's a difference between towards and with. You can be honest towards someone, but you cannot be honest. You can be honest towards someone, but it's different from being honest with someone. To be honest towards someone, that's your attitude towards them. But to be honest with someone is when you are dealing with one another and you can rely on one another. Now, as you may understand, of course you understand by experience, that doesn't always work. The same way, as a believer, you operate in love towards all, but you cannot operate in love with all. That's not possible, and that's not what Christ is even expecting of you. Just understand this. Games have their value because there are interests involved. Okay? So if you're in a basketball team, just do as the manual says. Alright? If you're at the job, do what your boss tells you to do, unless it's something against the law, or if something's going to bring long-term harm to yourself, to your boss, and to the whole company. But nevertheless, you understand this. Social constructions and those conditions are there. Deal with them wisely. But never, under any circumstance, agree with a fear construct. Or, as the Bible calls them, idols. Well, that's it for now. Agree with Christ and be at peace.